Are you fairly new to the communication space? Maybe you got promoted and now you're responsible for people. You have to give regular reports. You're now sitting in meetings, you're participating in meetings. Maybe you're now asked to do presentations to update the bosses. I'm here to help. I'm going to give you my system, my framework for clear communication. So you probably find that if you're new to this, that you have a tendency to ramble, or that you don't think you have enough to say. You're having trouble supporting your arguments or just all your points. You don't know where to begin. You don't know how to organize things. You don't know how to make your information, your point land with your particular audience. Again, I've got a system for you that can help do that. Because if you fail to do those things, you lose your audience, you lose your credibility. Again, no one listens to you, your ideas go unnoticed, people start to kind of yawn and whatever when you start talking. You don't want that. You need to come across as confident and secure in the knowledge that you do actually have. And so, again, I got a system for you that will help you. I've been doing this for decades. I've got over 30 years of communicating under my belt, whether it was as a waiter when I was very, very young. I've been an IT director. I work in the ministry, and I'm also a college speech professor. And so I got a lot of information stored up that I want to share with you. And I boiled all of that down into a pretty simple system that I call track. Okay. Now, you might be thinking, well, I don't need a system. I just need to be more confident. That's not it. Confidence doesn't make your message any better. It just makes you look better doing it. But a poor message doesn't work no matter how good you look. In fact, a great message will come across far better by someone who doesn't look all that confident than a bad message. The point of communicating is to get your message across, to have your message understood. That's it. And so it doesn't matter how good you look doing it or really how bad you look doing it. Now, I'm not saying there's no point to learning how to be a professional presenter and learning some of those things, but I think 80% of the way you have a good message, and that's what matters. And then that builds confidence. So it's not, I need to be more confident. I need to work on my performance skills. It's not, I just need to slow down. Maybe people aren't hearing me. Maybe they're just not getting it. No, they're just lost, or you're not organized, they're confused, or you're missing something where your audience just, there's a disconnect. That's certainly possible. It happens all the time. And the answer also is it more practice, or not just more practice. More practice is certainly valuable and certainly helpful, but if you're practicing the wrong thing, you're going to just get better at doing the wrong thing. So poor practice, you've heard this phrase, poor practice leads to poor performance. You want good practice of good habits and good things. So that's not the answer. The answer isn't to be more animated, to get louder, to yell, to grab people by the neck and shake them and say, you need to listen to me. That's not the answer. The answer is almost always clear thinking first, and therefore a system or a framework to use to get you thinking first. And you do this before you speak. We've had a couple other videos that have talked about rambling in particular, or have talked about just the idea of how do I get my brain to organize things. So I've got a video about with a couple of tools that can help you in the moment get organized. But this system is more about when you have time to prepare a presentation or to write a report. It doesn't matter whether you're speaking or writing or using sign language or Morse code. The process is the same. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to have a plan. You need to be able to get to that plan and execute that plan. Otherwise, again, you lose your audience and they are unhappy. Your bosses are unhappy, and you don't want your bosses to be unhappy. You want to be the person that they can go to, that they can count on, that will communicate the message. They'll get the right information out there. The audience will understand it, and it won't take forever, right? Brevity is also your friend. So I call this thing TRACK, and it's an acronym that means thesis, research, audience, craft, and know. And you can download in the description a free version of that. It's a small abbreviated version of TRACK. I'm going to go over it very briefly right here. Again, thesis, research, audience, craft, and know. And the value here is that if you apply this system, if it takes 10 minutes or 10 hours, you apply this system, you will come out more confident. You will have better clarity in your presentation, in your report, in your email. In that phone call that you have to make, you will have more credibility. This will make you more valuable as an employee, as a manager, a supervisor, whatever your role is. This will help you to move up the food chain, move up the ladder. After all, that's one of the things that I think we all want to do is move up, get paid a little better, a little more respect, and maybe add a little more value. So let's talk about those 5 things. Again, thesis, research, audience, craft, and know. So thesis is pretty simple. Now, if you studied communication at all in college, I'm betting many of you have, but I'm also guessing it's probably been a while. You probably are like me, how I was back then, and how most people are. They take that one speech class because they have to, and then they do the odd presentation in some of their other college classes, but it's not really your thing. You're a programmer or you're a money person, all these other things. And really this idea of communicating uh, kind of creates some anxiety, which is normal and nothing really to worry about. So if you have a system in place that helps you deal with this, this will also help you deal with the anxiety. If you know what you want to say and you have a plan to say it, trust me, your anxiety level will come down, and especially once you've done this for a few times. So let's talk about the thesis. The thesis, again, in communication classes, they might have all these special terms. You know how academics like to be. They have all these special terms for everything. But practically speaking, what it boils down to is your thesis is that one sentence, that one thing, that one main idea that you're trying to get across to your audience. Again, is it your coworkers? Is it your bosses? Is it your spouse? Is it a classroom? Are you talking to an employee on the phone trying to give them instructions? Are you coaching someone? Are you kind of, on the other side where you're having to talk to someone about performance issues and mistakes they've made? Are you firing someone? There's all kinds of ways in which just knowing the basic thing that you want to talk about is going to help you, because everything else that happens in this communication, again, speech, presentation, report, email, phone call, everything that happens in that communication needs to be related to this thesis, to not the topic, the thesis, a very specific idea that you're trying to communicate. So you might have a topic of dogs, but your thesis is, I want to talk about the dietary requirements of dogs. That's your thesis. So that's what you do first. You got to know what you're talking about before you can research it or write it down. It's like you got to know where you're going before you can look up directions. So then we go to the R in track, which is research. And yes, you have to do research. Now, the level of importance that this communication situation is will determine how much research you need to do. You're doing a report for the bosses on why you should spend $5 million on this new system. That's going to require a lot of research. He's sending a text to the group about tomorrow's business meeting. Not a lot of research, maybe zero research, but at least you give it a moment. The idea here is, what do I need to know as the communicator, as the writer, as the speaker? What do I need to know to support this thesis? Now, it's always good to know more than that, but what do I need to know? How do I support that? So you do your research on that. Again, taking our dog example, my research will be focused on the dietary requirements of dogs, and I might find there's a whole bunch of different elements to that. There are requirements for puppies, adults, and seniors. There are different requirements for small, medium, and large breeds. There are different requirements, for example, for pets, service dogs, and then working dogs like hunting dogs or guard dogs or some such. And so there's all these elements that go into it. And I've learned all these things. And really, again, the focus is on dietary requirements. So that's my thesis. So that's where I'm going to stay. I'll learn a lot of other things along the way, but I need to know, what if my thesis is dietary requirements of dogs, what do I need to know to support that? And then you turn your attention to A. Once you finish that, or you're getting close to finishing that, you turn your attention to the A, which is the audience. What about my audience do I need to remember? Who are they? What do they know? What's their knowledge level? What's their tolerance level for what I'm about to write or say? Are there any concerns that might be related to their demographics, gender and age and different things like that? There's lots that you can be discussed on thinking about your audience. Not everything matters, but sometimes things matter. Talking about dogs and dietary habits probably won't make any difference on most of your demographic things, but it might if you're talking about some hot button issues. Then maybe certain groups are more for or against these things, and you want to know. You also want to think about, are there any cultural differences? Does this culture value things the same way that my culture does, that I do? Or even down to, do they use words the same way that I do? I'm an American, I live in Texas, so maybe I use the words freedom or liberty differently than someone who comes from a country, say, like Russia or China. And so I need to understand some of those things. Maybe it's um, education level or socioeconomic level. People that are very, very highly educated generally kind of want a little bit of that from the writing or the speaking that they're listening to, that kind of thing. People that aren't very well educated or are very young, they're not going to understand really big fancy words. Are you talking to engineers? Engineers like numbers and math. Are you talking to doctors? Doctors like fancy Latin words and medical stuff. So you might use the word hypertension if your audience are medical professionals. If your audience was everybody else, you might just say high blood pressure. And that seems really simple, but if you think about it, you think that through, that's going to help that problem where your points, your information is not really landing with your audience, because maybe you were missing something. Maybe you're missing some, again, cultural difference, language barrier, terminology barrier, all those kind of things. So you're thinking about the who, and also this might help you reduce the level of jargon you're using. I've lived in a military community for 2 decades, and believe me, there's a lot of jargon in the military. If you were in the military, you know exactly what I mean. If you don't, you don't, because we don't really do that in most of the rest of our lives. And so these folks really have a specific way of speaking, and they identify with that. They like that. They're used to that, but the rest of us aren't. And if they start talking like that to me, I don't understand what they're talking about. So we have to again think about the audience. And so what we've done to this point, TR&A, is that we've figured out exactly what the point is. We have done a bunch of research to find out what information is out there, what supports this thesis. I wanted to stop here and say, it may be that you'll understand or learn that your thesis was wrong and you need to adapt it and change it. And that's fine, because you want to be honest and truthful and so on here. There's a whole conversation about ethics and how you should handle that kind of stuff. I firmly believe in the golden rule: treat people the way you want to be treated. So I don't want to be lied to. I don't want to be manipulated. I don't want to be yelled at. And so I don't do those things. Also, those things often will get you in trouble and possibly even legal trouble at your business. So we figured out that, and then we know who we're talking to. Only then can we sit down and go to the C, which is craft. And that's where we have structure and intent kind of meeting together. And I chose the word craft very specifically because I believe the word craft implies that a level of effort and care was taken to build or create something that was great, that has quality. It's kind of like the difference between assembling an IKEA bookshelf and then crafting a bookshelf out of boards and screws and nails and glue, and you have to do it all yourself, and you've crafted this thing, and there is a clear difference. If you have any skill at all, there is a clear difference, and it's superior, the one that you made by hand, the one that you crafted. You maybe even added a little love into that, and that is what you need to do with your message. The message is the most important thing here, not you. And I think that goes contrary to what a lot of people think. I've got to look good. I've got to come across good. No, create a great message. The rest of the stuff will take care of itself. Because here's one of the realities, especially if you're pretty anxious about the public speaking part of this. Remember, this can work for writing or speaking. Writing doesn't generally bring a lot of anxiety like public speaking does. If you are really concerned about that, just remember, so is everyone else. And everyone else in the audience is probably glad that you're up there and not them. And so they will excuse the faux pas and the a little bit of scrambled words and that kind of thing, as long as they can understand what you're talking about. And that is your goal. I'm going to do a video, probably what I'll call a deep dive video at some point, and we'll go into how communication really works, and we'll We'll dive down into that. But your job as a communicator, writing, speaking, whatever, is to craft a message that the audience has the best chance to understand. So this is where you spend a lot of time, is crafting, is building, and that includes putting it in a structure. How are you going to organize this information? So you might think about should I do this in a sort of a time order or a spatial order? Am I doing a compare and contrast? What version of that structure gets the point across, supports the thesis the best way, and will be understood by my audience in the best way possible. So we're merging that structure with the intent, and that's where the craft comes in. So it's very important that you spend time here working on it. And just to note, work on your introduction conclusion after you figured out basically what your message is. You've outlined it all. You've put it down in some notes. Well, that then brings us to the final piece, which is K, and that is to know. That is really just about understanding what your presentation, what your paper is about. And this probably means more in terms of public speaking than it does in writing. Writing is pretty easy to go back and edit and all that. But it goes without saying that you need to know what you're talking about. And so when you're presenting something, you need to have an idea what it is. Now, I'm not suggesting that you memorize. In fact, I am diametrically opposed to people memorizing their presentations or speeches. There's a place for that. That's a pretty high level skill for most people. I don't believe that you need to aspire to that skill unless you are going to be maybe a totally professional communicator, like that's actually your job, and not like most people where it's just sort of part of their job. It's a secondary or tertiary part of their job. I think to memorize and present at the same time is difficult. It comes across robotic. Most people, when they memorize, they look up and to the right when they're trying to recall everything, and then they stop. And when they get lost, they have to rewind in their mind, and then they'll usually pick up this thing they memorized a couple of sentences back. Then they'll go and then until they forget. So don't do that. Make notes. Again, I'm going to do a video on notes if I haven't done it already, if you haven't seen it already. And so you got to understand it. Don't memorize it. You do have to practice. So practice the right thing. So now you have a good structure. You know who it's for. You know what the point is. Now you practice that and you get to know it. So when you look at the notes, you're not looking at it for the first time. You know what to expect. You know that point A comes after point B. You know generally what those are. You know what the ideas are. So you can look at your notes and see the idea and know what you have to talk about. And you know what? That's track. That's pretty simple. Thesis, research, audience, craft, and know. You put that in place. You can do it in 10 or 15 minutes if that's all the time you have. You can use this on much, much larger processes. And so again, the value is that you now have confidence because you know what your plan is. Now all you got to do is get up there and execute it. And everyone can. You have clarity. Your audience will be able to understand what you're saying. All of that together will give you more credibility. And you know what? That effort pays off because this is the kind of thing that directly relates to your success, your promotion, your promotability, those kind of things. Whether or not people respect you and listen to you, you need to be able to communicate well. Again, thanks for watching. Download the free track booklet if you're interested in more detail on this. It is listed down in the description below.